You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. The date is fast approaching, August the 9th. It is a Friday, kicking off at 5 p.m. at Cork and Carry at the Park at 33rd and Princeton. Sox in the Basement, the 108 combining for a live event. A show that will not be recorded and put online, although there may be some snippets. Ed is going to be there. I've come up with some ideas for you. You may be my Johnny on the spot, talking with the fan base while it's going on, and maybe getting some audio that we can share on the show afterwards. But if people want to see this thing, there's no ticket necessary. It's first come, first serve. Should be a beautiful night between two teams that have given up on their season now that we've heard that the Cubs are probably going to be sellers. And so August the 9th, lots of young players out on the field, and that'll make it more competitive. I think that's going to be a fun series now. That's going to feel like the original Crosstown Classic when the games didn't matter, but come on out and get an award-winning burger, enjoy that beautiful space, indoor, outdoor, hang out with us. We're going to have some fan interaction. Our guest today, Scott Merkin from MLB.com, may stop by, along with a myriad of other guests, and we'll be announcing that as we get closer. And just join us at Cork and Carry at the Park at 33rd and Princeton to see everything they have going on there, and also at the Beverly location where I was at a live show on Friday, and that place was rocking. What a fun patio, what a fun place to be all summer long. See more at corkandcarry.com. You're coming though to the event, right? Even though you won't be on mic?
That is the plan, and I'm trying to think of things too, like maybe I'll bring some inflatable boxing gloves, and if somebody's wearing a Michael Barrett jersey and someone's wearing an AJ Przinsky jersey, we'll have a charity boxing match out on the street.
I love how the lawyer came up with the thing that's going to get me sued when somebody gets hurt. That was brilliant.
Well, yeah.
Anyway.
And then the show is mine. And nobody will listen.
I want to kick off this show with our guest because Scott Merkin knows so much about what's happening behind the scenes, and I feel like there are times where Merk kind of takes some flack because he may look at things through a rosy-colored glasses, or he may sound like he's kind of giving you a line from the organization, but I think what you really get from him is what they're really saying and what's really going on, don't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't be that entrenched and close with the team and not get some of the real stuff. And sometimes, we're so jaded as a fan base that I think sometimes we forget that the company line is also sometimes exactly what's happening.
Joining me on the phone line right now, our good friend from MLB.com. He pops on the show from time to time, and we're lucky to have him. Scott Merkin is on the line. How are you, Merk?
Good. How are you doing, Chris?
Man, I'm doing great. You must be refreshed after the All-Star break. I know a lot of people that cover the team or work for the team took a nice little vacation, and now it's back to the slog of seeing whether or not this team can set a historically low mark in all of Major League Baseball history. Do you think they can do it?
Yeah, I actually didn't have too much. I had a couple of days off, but remember we had the draft on Sunday night, Monday, and Tuesday, and it's not necessarily work intensive, but you're looking for stories. You're waiting for the picks to finalize. You're waiting for Mike Shirley to get on the Zoom. Then you go through his stuff and then write. So it ends up taking you from like 1 to 7:30, So it was a respite from the games, but still worked there. I don't know. I think, they've only had one run this year, right? They were 11-8 and everything else has been a debacle this year. I don't think they'll get to the record. I think they'll, certainly lose over 100. I mean, they're at the time of this taping, closing in on 80 already. But I don't think they're going to get to the 119 or 120. Now, does it matter if they get to 112 instead of 119 or 108 instead of 119? It's still an awful season and the second straight really bad season for a franchise that probably shouldn't have to go through this kind of prolonged stretch of futility. So, Chris, everyone you talk to, from players, well, not so much players because I don't know if they know the whole system, but everyone in the front office, talks about Chris Getz has a plan. So we are going to see in the next year or so how this plan plays out overall.
All right, so you and I have had conversations about it. We talked right before the show, the idea of, well, how much of it is on the manager and how much of it is on the players? Because, if the players aren't good, then, that doesn't put the manager in a very good position. But it is really bad this year. I understand. I mean, as a fan looking in, I noticed that Jerry Reinsdorf generally does not want to pay somebody to sit on their couch for any more than a year. So I understand that Pedro's likely to make it through this season because what's the point of getting rid of him? Or at least that might be the philosophy. But you also hear rumors of who they may hire next year, and a lot of people assume he's going to be out. Do you think that's a foregone conclusion that this is the end for Pedro Grifol at the end of the year?
I think a few things. I think a lot of owners of a lot of companies don't want to pay too many people to not do anything for like a year, right? So I don't think that's totally germane to Jerry. And during the time I've covered the team, 22 years, he's, eaten a number of contracts of players that, still had a year and a half. I mean, there were a couple that he ate 2 years on. So I don't think that's totally specific just to the White Sox. And I also think that if you're going to make a move, there needs to be a purpose behind it, right? Like, this team is bad. It's been bad since the start of the season. They were 3-22. There was no and I get they went 11-8 after that, but I think they went 1-18 or 1-17 after that. So at that point, the purpose for me to make a move as manager would be if you have someone in mind in your system, on the staff, even outside the organization, who you think is going to be the manager if you don't bring Pedro back in 2025, that would be the reason to let him go. I get the whole accountability thing, and trust me, everyone knows who listens to me or reads me or does anything else knows that I'm a diehard Michigan fan, and there's a lot of accountability yelling when Rich Rodriguez was coach and Brady Hoke was the football coach, and even when Harbaugh had the couple mediocre years before they went 40-3 over the last 3 years and won a title, I should add. But ultimately, you can't just fire people every year. I mean, this is if they do move Pedro, this is what their sixth manager since Robin Ventura, I think. Robin, Ricky, they'll be there. Yeah, Robin, Ricky, Tony, Cairo filled in when Tony was unfortunately sick, Pedro, and then whoever is next. And you could go 7 if you go back to Ozzie the year before Robin. So that's too many managers. And I just don't know. I mean, did this team have it in them when they were 3-22 if you made a managerial change right then, which would have made sense, right, to turn it around and be decent this year? Or did you just say, well, this is kind of a rebuilding year. We're going to have to take our lumps and hopefully get better next year. He has another year on his contract. I don't know what they're going to do, but I would say it's tough whether you put 80% of the blame on him, which is not fair, I don't think, or 10 or 15%. It's tough to go through when you lose 101 and 112 games in back-to-back seasons, hypothetically, right? That's tough to keep going. So, I just think whatever they've done this year just hasn't worked. And the interesting thing is they have not been. This is going to sound weird and almost kind of like an excuse, but maybe you understand what I'm saying. They haven't been as bad as their record. We've seen some, like, take an example, like Oakland teams or Colorado teams that have been really bad. I mean, the Sox have been in a lot of games. So I don't know what you put that on, that they're just good enough to be really awful. Look at the game against the first game in the Texas series where they had the lead. They blew the save in the 9th, walked the bases loaded to get to Langford, get the righty-righty matchup. I guess you get a force any base too. And Langford got the hit to win the game. And there's been a lot of games like this year. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say there's like 37 or 38 losses where they've let in. Now, again, that's deceiving too, because that could be like 1-0 in the first they let, so, and then gave up 7 in the second. So no one knows the exact, but there's a lot of games where they've been ahead late and lost, and they don't have a lot of comeback wins, if any, so it's, I don't know. I would think there would be a managerial change, but I can't say that for certain.
Scott Merkin from MLB.com, presented today by Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Switch to a new age of life. Keep mom and dad, grandma and grandpa out of assisted living. Make it so they can get around on their own and live independently with stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling. They work with your insurance. They have 0% financing for qualified individuals. And if you use a CPAP machine and you're unhappy with your vendor, switch now. Get supplies directly mailed to you, and you could test out the latest and greatest in CPAP machines in their showroom on the South Side. They also have the latest and greatest in continuous glucose monitors and so much more. See everything they have to offer at hhme.com. So the way you're talking, and I'll subscribe to it here for a moment. The idea is, look, they've been in a lot of games. Things haven't gone right for them. And you look at what's going on with the pitching side.
which has been very good for probably 2/3 of the year, right?
Yes, and you see a lot of youth that looks good that could come up here still
Right.
and join them. And you look at their philosophy, especially in the draft. We see who they're picking up. We see the type of players. Brian Bannister seems to have a system. We'll see how that all works out. But there seems to be a very set plan there. And then you notice in the draft, and this is something we talked about with a couple other folks. We talked to some folks over at Future Sox about it recently. The idea that they were going for, with the exception of a few prep stars, some guys that already were a little bit more developed as hitters. They're looking likely in this trading season over the next week or so of probably trying to find guys that are much closer to the major leagues when it comes to position players that already have a process, that aren't raw. And then you see Moncada and Jimenez not worth what they're going to get paid next year and likely getting bought out, and that may add some salary. Is it safe to assume that the team will likely try to address hitting far more, either with trades or with even signings in the offseason, to try to come out and be something different in 2025?
Yeah, I think you have to try and take a step forward in 25. I don't think you can go a third straight season if you're the White Sox with this kind of results. I mean, last year's was not expected, and then it quickly got away from them. And this year, I think they knew they were going to be bad. This year, they knew they were going to be bad or not great. I think they wrongly played out, hung their hat on the AL Central, which has not been good in the last 3 years. The AL Central the last 3 years has had a good division winner, the White Sox in 21, the Guardians in 22, who had an amazing September. I think they went like 21-8 in September. And then the Twins last year were like 86, 87 wins, right? That was a team that was near 500 for a good portion of the season. And then the rest of the division was not great. The division has been outstanding this year. I mean, Cleveland has been a surprise, even, with a little bit of a funk the last week or so. Minnesota has been hot and cold, but overall about 10 or 11 over. And I really enjoy watching that Kansas City team play. And Detroit's now right at 500. So there's 4 pretty solid teams in that division. So they were wrong to think that the AL Central would come back to them. But even with their room for error this year, everything has gone wrong. Robert, Jimenez, and Moncada have played, I think, 3 games together, I wrote the other day, before Jimenez got hurt, and then the other 2 got hurt also, or out a little longer period of time. Benintendi and Vaughn, who were 2 guys they were counting on, have not had good seasons, or not had the seasons they expected. Vaughn's been much better over the last, month and a half, but they've not had the season they've expected. And while they have had some good stories, I mean, Crochet is one of the best stories in baseball, let alone the White Sox. Eric Fetty, same category. Great showing by Jonathan Cannon and Drew Thorpe since they've been up. I think Michael Kopech, despite having some moments, has learned a lot in the back end of that bullpen. There's some good stories, but when you have that little room for error and then everything goes wrong, it's going to be that way. So I think they're going to take a step forward. I have no idea. I don't think it's going to be a huge spending off season. But remember, Chris Getz has now put together a number of really good young pitchers, and there's only so many spots you have, right? Now, granted, depth is key. You can't just say, well, we have 5 pitchers, that's it, we can get rid of everyone else. But you may see him use a couple of the younger guys, not now, obviously, but in the offseason, and maybe acquire some bats going in that direction. And real quickly going to the manager part, Chris knows Pedro. Chris worked with Pedro. I think Chris played for Pedro when Pedro was part of the Royals staff, Pedro Grifol. But Chris may want his own manager. Chris was involved in the hiring process when Pedro was picked out of whatever it was, 30 candidates, and I think down to 9 finalists. But he may want to go out and get his own. So that could be part of it too, because Chris was named GM and Pedro stayed on when Chris was named GM. Now, again, not foreign to each other, but that may be part of the decision making too. There's a lot of stuff that's going to come down between now and, October 1st, October 2nd to help shape the direction of the Sox. But I do think, again, finalizing that and going forward, they need to figure out who the manager, it can't just be the manager for next year, which is what Pedro has left. So you got to figure out, is he your guy? If they really believe in the front office that he's your guy, or you bring in the next guy and you just say, this is your show, obviously with the front office in conjunction, but this is your show for the next 4 years. Let's get after it. Let's get this right.
All right, so it's a lot to cover with the guys that might get traded. So I wanted to float to you what I think is going to happen and then let you poke holes in it. Okay, Merk, because you're around the team. But this is how I see it. Luis Robert Jr. and Garrett Crochet are both available, but I don't think Robert Jr.'s value is maxed out. I don't think a lot of teams match up with what the White Sox want. I see they're trying to make him run a lot lately. I think he's 9 9 stolen bases in his last 16 games, which is a really high number for him, and they're trying to max his value. But I don't think they're going to get what they want. I think he stays. I think Crochet stays unless the Orioles come up with something, because they're really the only farm system that has exactly what Getz is looking for, and you don't have to move either one of those guys. But I do believe you're going to see Tommy Pham go. You're going to see Paul DeJong go. You're going to see Michael Kopech go. You hope that you might be able to get something for Chris Flexen. And I think on outside chance you see an Andrew Vaughn or Gavin Sheets go, because I don't know if they really want to keep two very similar players, one from one side of the plate and one from the other side, on the team moving forward. What do you think?
All makes sense, but I think you forgot Fetty in there too, right?
Oh, yeah, Fetty, I've assumed he's already gone. Like, he's the piece that I think they get the most back for out of that whole group.
Fetty is another one who I think is a tremendous story. You know, the guy was, you know, by his own admission, not very good when he pitched for Washington, took the season in Korea, reinvented himself, not just reinvented himself, but dominated in the KBO, came back, and it's played tremendously. I mean, he's got an ERA below 3. I mean, he probably should have been an all-star, whatever that means one way or the other. But I mean, literally, you can put him in a pennant contending rotation as a number 2 or 3 guy in that rotation. And at times looks like a number 1 guy, right? Put it this way, labels are maybe kind of useless at this point. He is a good starter and will fit any team, including the White Sox for that matter. So I think you're going to get a good return, but I think all your logic makes sense. I still am of the mindset that Crochet and Robert are part of the White Sox on July 31st, or if you want to even go the night of July 30th. But I mean, there may be a team that, you know, gets close the next, you know, day or two before the trade deadline and says, no, we got to have it, and ups the ante. I think, again, the Sox have set a bar on what they want. And if it's not met, then they keep 2 very talented, very key guys in that clubhouse. And maybe you explore it in the offseason. I mean, hypothetically, you have right now, 2 or 3 teams that can, you know, match the demand for Crochet. And you're not sure how you're going to use him the rest of the way, because even the Sox have talked about watching his innings. You know, he's at 107 1/3 going into his start in Texas, and I believe that's 34 1/3 more than his entire career in the major leagues combined. So they're not going to, you know, he's not going to throw 200 this year or 180 or anything like that. So how do you use him if you're contending, knowing that you still have 2 more years of him as what you think is a frontline top of the rotation starter? But are there more teams that are interested in him in the offseason when you can just go with him straight on as a starter? You know, there's no worries. You're at, you know, here we go. He's part of a rotation. Let's make the move. So maybe that increases from 2 or 3 to 8 or 9, and the return gets even greater. You know, sort of what it's somewhat similar, not quite there though, to what Dylan Cease went through. You know, when there were rumors of him possibly being traded at the deadline. I think we were in Texas at that point, and then he ended up staying until spring training. I don't know if that was Chris's plan, is to keep until spring training, but you know, he wasn't moved until before the season started. So I kind of agree with you. I think I think the bottom line, just to view it, is, you know, pretty much anyone on that roster, and this is not speaking out of turn, Chris Getz has said this, is available for the right return. So there are some that are going to command greater returns, some that they'll move them to probably help them too, and put them on a contender from a team that's going to lose 100 games. And then some will move for that reason and to open up spots for younger guys who will play the last, you know, month and a half of the season for the White Sox. So, or 2 months for the White Sox. So it'll be interesting. You know, I'm not sure it'll be the force at the deadline that everyone expected, but it will be definitely interesting.
Before I let you out of here, you mentioned the Dylan Cease move by Chris Getz as you're going through that explanation. And
right.
And I'm impressed by the fact that he gets Drew Thorpe after I watched Drew Thorpe pitch. And I'm impressed by the fact that he's still got 2 other pieces that could turn into something that he got out of that deal. And he held his cards for a long time while everybody nationally was basically saying, what are the White Sox doing if they don't trade him soon? And he never folded. He may be a really good poker player. I wouldn't want to sit down at a table with him. And it looks like a lot of his moves, a lot of things that he's done so far, he's had more success than failures in the short time he's been in there, and he's brought in a very different front office. He went out and he got guys from outside the organization, and some of it seems to be paying off. What do you think so far of a White Sox GM that I think most of us did not want because he was an internal hire who had never done it before?
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, I covered him as a player, you know, so he's always been a sharp baseball mind. I've always enjoyed talking to Chris, and I mean, I used to joke with Chris that he demanded a trade to Kansas City because I wore him out so much about Michigan stuff over the years when he was a player. So he's been a sharp baseball mind since I've known him. I don't know what you can say about the process until you really see them starting to come out on the other side. And I'm not talking about winning divisions. I'm talking about at least being competitive, 75 wins, a 500 season, at least getting there where there's a chance. Although they've had chances this year, but there's a better chance than not that you're gonna win a game. But yeah, I like the moves he's made, and I want to say, on Thorpe has impressed me because Thorpe, his second start, I guess it was, right, in Arizona, and I was there, got knocked around the field. And post game, he was fine. He talked to us. He said, "Hey, that's part of the process." He's a very low key dude, very quiet, very low key, and he just said, "Got to go back to work." And after his start Sunday in Kansas City, where he was outstanding against a really good offensive team, probably the best start he's had. Once again, he was, I was happy with it, but still have work to do. So he's got that ultimate pitchability. His fastball topped out at like 93, but we saw a guy, granted this is apples and oranges because Mark Burley is a Hall of Fame contender, but we saw a guy, Mark Burley, pitch that same way, right? I mean, at the end, I don't think he was even near 90 with his fastball and still out there winning games, pretty much, winning 15, 16 games, giving his team a chance every time out. So I really impressed with the guy they got. And I think that's something they've looked for. One thing I'll finalize is they talked a lot about culture. They still talk a lot about culture. And people can laugh because, there's 48 games under 500, but it's a great clubhouse and they really do feed off each other. And so I would say A+ in that category. And maybe that's the base they really wanted out of this year. Maybe quietly they knew that was the biggest thing they could put in place for this year and now add players to feed to what they've sort of built and hopefully develop a winning culture for years to come.
Scott Merkin, writes for MLB.com, has been covering the White Sox for decades and got 3 Michigan mentions in during that 20-minute interview. Good for you, Scott.
That's low for me, I think, but I'll work on it as the season approaches.
You get the record in, you get former coaches in, you're killing it.
I know, I do what I can.
All right, Merk, thanks so much.
All right, Chris, take care.
The Broadcast Basement On Demand Radio Network's been around for 6 years and is home to Sox in the Basement, among other shows. We've also served countless Chicagoland and South Side area businesses. If you would like to get your message out, we can get you over 1 million listener streams per year at a cost of a fraction of a penny per listener. More information, give a call to 773-653-4398 or check out broadcastbasement.com. I think the first thing that stood out to me listening to what Merck said is that we're right about a few things. I mean, I'll beat my chest here for a second, but we've been saying for a long time I don't think Crochet and Robert are going. He doesn't think that's going to happen either unless somebody blows the doors off of the White Sox. And we've been talking about the idea you can't keep a Sheets and you can't keep a Vaughn. I floated that out there. He did not push back on that listening to it. I've seen a lot of people now starting to talk about the fact that Andrew Vaughn might be the name that also moves off of this team. You see the focus on the pitching. You see the idea that, yes, they're going to get rid of Jimenez and they're going to get rid of Moncada. We're not far off on that, it doesn't sound like. And that they are going to be focusing on adding bats either by trading from the dearth of pitching that they have in the offseason and or spending money when it comes time to the offseason with a little bit of the money that they save on Robert and Jimenez. So I felt good listening to it because it feels like there's a plan.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is there is always, I think there's always going into a trade deadline, a plan for a team. It's just whether or not the plan is realistic, right? And that's always where we run into problems sometimes with the White Sox is that you look at what the plan has been sometimes and you look at what some of the things were done, like think about the Craig Kimbrell trade, right? This one, the plan is relatively straightforward. It's got to be clearing the decks a little bit. And somebody like Andrew Vaughn or Gavin Sheets, they're oddly desirable out on the market. I mean, even watching Ty France from the Mariners get DFA'd and the articles that suggest that he's going to contenders, just on a guy that's coming off of a contender because he's not good enough to hold first base down for them. It is interesting that for all of the talk about Crochet and Robert, that how much you hit on the head, guys like Fetty, Flexen, Vaughn, Sheets, and Pham, and trying to get back some value for these guys that really aren't long-term parts.
Well, what's interesting too is who's out there right now. We keep saying the Orioles are probably the only people that can give a good package for Crochet, and that's why I think he ends up staying on the team. But also now we're seeing the Yankees coming out, just yesterday. The idea that now the reports are that Jones and the Martian Dominguez, those two outfielders, are not completely off the table in trade talks. And you wonder if they're trying to now get a package and if a team like the White Sox, who they're talking to, because that's what they're going to have to give up. And it won't just be one of those guys. It's going to have to be a package if they're going to get Robert or Crochet to come over to their team. And Chris Getz is in such a great position right now. I mentioned with Merck that he's kind of a poker player, and Merck pointed it out. He waited a long time to trade Cease, longer than anybody thought he was going to, and look what he gets back. He gets a guy who Merck himself described in the locker room as a cool, calm dude who did not get flustered by that second start when he got beat up, who came right back and was dominant. I mean, that guy's a dude right now. I don't know if you saw what I tweeted out recently from the Sox in the Basement Twitter account. Drew Thorpe has a 1.01 whip, walks and hits per innings pitched in 7 starts. There are closers in Major League Baseball who don't have that. That's insane for a starting pitcher. And 5 of those starts were quality starts. And one of those starts was the debacle that was Game 2. So including that second start that he had in Major League Baseball where he got beat up, a 1.01 whip in those total of 7 starts with 5 starts as quality starts, opponents hitting 162 against him. And you know, you look at the guys that were traded in the rebuild with Rick Hahn and how they all failed. And you see the first big move that Chris Getz made in moving Dylan Cease and how he held out. Look at what he seems to have gotten in Drew Thorpe. This could be a long-time top-of-the-rotation guy, and you still have 2 other really nice prospects that we're waiting to see what happens with them.
Talent that he can get back, and the talent in playing poker, and the talent in that you can get back from not jumping at the first guys, not jumping at who is the top of the prospect list. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Jackson Holliday maybe being moved by the Orioles, and part of that is that the Orioles are looking at this going, well, you know, we don't have room for all these guys after all. And they're all, Kobe Mayo's on his way up, and Holiday, you know, you got to find a spot for him, and Heston Kjerstad and Kyle Stowers, and there's a lot of guys.
And they got to look at him at the major league level, and he isn't ready yet. That's the other thing with Jackson Holiday.
That's the problem. The problem is that, you know, when you did get a look at him, he's not like Adley Rutschman. He didn't come up and start succeeding, right? He's struggled mightily, and maybe there's something that they saw in him that they're sitting there going, we're kind of soured on him. Well, you know, if you were back in the Rick Hahn era, I would actually be worried that Rick Hahn would just jump at it because of where he's placed on the prospect lists overall, and would just sit there and go, look what I got, ha, I got it. Because that's how Rick Hahn talks. But, you know, I guess, I don't know. But no, I worry that he would just jump at the name.
That's what you'd be doing with the Yankees. You'd be jumping at Dominguez, although he's been dealing with injuries as much as a guy like Eloy Jimenez deals with injuries, right? You'd be dealing away to pick up another outfielder that seems to constantly be hurt, even though he's got this huge ceiling. And then Spencer Jones, for all of the hype, last year, when he gets the AA, he hits 261 with a 739 OPS. I mean, that's not otherworldly in AA. That's not, I mean, he's got a lot of hype, but that's not otherworldly. And so far this year, this is the big guy that everybody says, oh, you got to go get this guy, and the Yankees want him, and now he might be available in a trade. He's hitting 238 in AA with a 716 OPS. So what has he done other than have a lot of hype around him and show up on a prospect list at this point? But what he's actually doing right now, if you just took his name off and looked at the stats, and you'd be like, well, this was like your centerpiece for dealing away Luis Robert Jr. or Garrett Crochet, you'd be like, we did what? I feel like if the Yankees were saying those 2 guys are available right now, I would know Rick Hahn was making a move. I don't know if Chris Getz is making a move to go in that direction in New York, because he seems to be a little bit more selective in the very small sample size that I've seen with him.
Yeah, I don't like the idea that a team suddenly makes their previously untouchable prospects available at the trade deadline, because there's ways to shore up your team at the trade deadline if you're contending, okay? If the Yankees need a pitcher, they don't have to have Garrett Crochet to fill in part of the rotation to stabilize things. There's plenty of guys that are out there that they can go and get that are going to pitch decently enough. I mean, heck, the Dodgers just let go of James Paxton. You know, the Yankees, if they just need a starter, if they just need somebody that they think that they can trust, they could go out and pick him up off the scrap pile, try and have him reclaim his glory, and not give up any prospects. But you do worry when all of a sudden Spencer Jones is available, that they have looked at Spencer Jones, they've looked at his game, they've found a flaw, they found something they don't like, and they don't necessarily see him as being such an integral part of the future the way he once was. And it kind of falls into the same, back to Yoan Moncada, who, by the way, is, has anticipated soreness now and isn't coming back anytime soon.
Anticipated soreness. That's the name of my new band.
Anticipated soreness.
Yeah.
Anticipated soreness should be the name of his next album, actually. But, Yoan Moncada was at the top of the prospect list. Everybody was very excited about him. The Red Sox had no problems trading him. Chris Sale, tremendous pitcher. Don't get me wrong. Chris Sale, tremendous talent. That was a huge get for the Red Sox. It was going to cost them something. But why not their number 2 prospect? Why give away your top guy? So when you see this and when you start hearing these things, it's not like, hey, get excited, folks, because Garrett Crochet is so awesome that the Orioles can't help but give you their top prospect, or the Yankees can't help but give you their top prospect. It's also that the Yankees and the Orioles and all these other teams have looked at their top prospects and gone, maybe not. And they're not close to Major League ready. And that's, I think, what we had heard initially anyway, was Garrett Crochet's moving for Major League ready talent. Luis Robert Jr. is moving for Major League ready talent. Drew Thorpe was Major League ready talent. He needed a little bit of time in the minors still. They wanted to do something with him, obviously.
That's it. You're nailing it right there, Ed. That's actually the perfect comparison. What Chris Getz did was hold out for somebody he knew was going to be able to come in and compete. And you don't know how it's going to work out with Thorpe, of course, but he was Major League ready. And if he waited, remember what they were telling us. They were going to compete this year, right? They were going to be much better than what this was this year. They wanted to go do a quick turnaround. And even in the face of that, that's what they held out for. There's no way they don't expect more or at least the same for Crochet. But again, Crochet, look at the level he's pitching at and look at the fact it's 2 more years, and look at Robert with 3 more years. They're looking for Drew Thorpe's like the floor. The Drew Thorpe deal for Cease is the floor of what the White Sox are looking for those 2 players. Teams either pony up or they just hold on to them into the offseason. If it's less than that return, then you're like, what are we doing?
It's not just about whether or not Chris Getz wants what he, gets what he wants when it comes to these trades too. It's also a question of, do teams not just match up with their minor league system and their prospects? Because everyone's really focused on their prospects. But when you look at somebody like the Orioles, you kind of wonder if he's sitting there going, yeah, but you know what? I also want guys off of your major league roster. I also want to talk to you about Jordan Westberg. I want to talk to you about Gunnar Henderson. And maybe it's something where Chris Getz, if he's going to make this move, he's going to make this move to get somebody that's already an established rising star in the major leagues and try and hold out that way. So I wouldn't be surprised if, what we're really missing here is who's on a major league roster already that Chris Getz really wants.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.